it is definitely going to be a game where I don't think one team is going to control it for the full 90 minutes. And no matter who has a lead, they will not feel comfortable with that lead, because we've seen United against Lyon in the quarterfinal completely throw away an advantageous situation. We've certainly seen Spurs do that any number of times, any number of ways.
The Europa League final is set. Premier League rivals Manchester United and Tottenham will face off CHAAAMPIONSSS in Bilbao on Wednesday, May the 21st. You will be able to watch it live, of course, across our network. Chris, in terms of a preview, both of these two sides objectively have had fairly terrible seasons, particularly when you look at the prism of the Premier League. So who goes into it as the favourite?
It's hard to tell. I mean, look, this is a team that's 15th in the Premier League against a side that's 16th in the Premier League, which is in some ways a measure of the strength of the English top flight. When you look at, we'll get to the Conference League later, but representation in the final there as well. Two teams that make it to the final here. And I think if you were to make me pick a favorite right now, it would only be Manchester United. And honestly, I'm probably doing it just based off the badge, based off of how they seem to get it done in these sorts of moments. They have that history of doing so. I think their performances, I would say, have been more consistent as well in the Europa League, particularly in these last couple of rounds, but we're splitting hairs here. There isn't really much in it between these two sides. You could definitely see either side winning it. I don't think if we're looking at the odds, there would be much of a difference in the odds. There was not really much of a difference in the season these two clubs have had. They basically had identical campaigns. Disastrous domestically, prosperous in Europe, to a degree where you feel at least a little bit better at it. It's still the second-tier European competition. It's not like they're in a Champions League final. The Europa League final is a much different thing. And so I do think that looking at this final, there's not much to separate it at all.
Will it be more of a mental battle? Who can deal with the psychological pressure, the expectation, particularly with Spurs? It's been a long time since they last won a trophy. That desperation to finally get it done. Who can stay calm when the pressure is on?
I wonder if that necessarily translates to the players. I do think that the clubs, the directors, the sporting directors, the managers that realize they have to build into next season. Yes, in some ways, if you're the players, you win your way into Champions League football next season. Otherwise, you're playing nothing. You're playing no European competition, which for a lot of players is not where they want to be at the highest levels of football. But I think this is one that's felt most by the fans, certainly, and I think by the clubs. I think Manchester United as a football club need this maybe more than any single entity going into this final, because Man United are a club that recently revealed through the owner, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, that they are not in the best financial situation, that there was a scenario in which they would have run out of money in Christmas this year. And so for them to get Champions League football, they are budgeting against not having any European football. It would be a boon of enormous proportions to have Champions League football next season. So I think for that pressure could go down to the players, but really is for them, can they deliver any kind of consistent level of performance?
That record that we've got on the screen there, I wanted to bring it up. Ange Postecoglou has certainly had Manchester United's number over the course of his time in North London. From the United perspective, and for Ruben Amorim planning for this game, how does he try to change that? Because ultimately what Postecoglou and the style of play that he uses has worked against United. So Amorim's got to try something different.
No question. I think looking at this final, the one thing that Amorim would draw confidence from is when Spurs went away to Manchester United and destroyed them. They beat them 3-0, and it was a comprehensive and sound victory. You would think, from Amorim's standpoint, that this is a different team, that he's actually gotten to implement his ideas, that we've seen what the best of a Man United side can look like in a European game, and they have to go and deliver that against Tottenham. But if you're just kind of going based off of reputation, based off of the current squads of players, how they have done, I do think that Spurs go through with sort of that matchup advantage. The one thing that would have to make you think differently is that I think Spurs are less effective at executing their game plan than they were when they played in the Premier League. And I think Man United would have to consider themselves more effective just based off of the work that they've done with Amorim. But we'll see. I mean, you could very easily come into this final thinking it'll be a close game or the matchups tilt this way, and then kind of 10-15 minutes in, the die is cast and we know which way the game will go from there. I can kind of see this being a decisive final just based off of who delivers their best punch on the day.
It could also be a decisive final for the managers' jobs, I think particularly in one way, not necessarily so much in the other, but could it potentially be the case, particularly for Ange Postecoglou, if one of them loses the game, that's them finished?
Well, with Postecoglou, there's a chance that if he wins the game, that's him finished. And that has been reported in the media over in the UK, which I think is unfair, considering the trophy obsession at Tottenham Hotspur. If you get that done, and you're the first manager to do that in 16 years, you kind of have earned the right to go again in that next season and play Champions League football next season, try and get the squad healthy, try and continue to build it in your image as you have done in the last 2 years. But it might be over regardless. So I think, in some ways, the fact that he has been talked about as a lame duck, Postecoglou, and still gotten good performances out of this team in Europe, I think is an indication that they're still playing for him, which is a really interesting going into a final. For Amorim, I think they're too committed to a long-term rehaul of the club to say, we're going to get rid of you now. That, I think, would be unbelievably harsh on Amorim. But I think if they lose this final and they finish 15th, 16th, maybe even 17th in the Premier League, and he had more than half a season, took over from Erik ten Hag, who was lingering around the European places to bottom half finish, no trophy, no European football next year. That is a major regression. And you start, I think he'll at least start next season. He starts on the back foot. If they start poorly again next season, I think he is under a lot of pressure and quickly.
What kind of game do you think we'll see between these two? Because as we said when we were discussing the Spurs performance against Bodo Glimt, that was a bit of a change from what we've normally seen from Ange Postecoglou this season, that really attacking style of play.
Yeah.
This was a bit more pragmatic. Is he going to take that and do it again, repeat in the final at San Mamés, or is he going to go back to what actually has worked against Manchester United, which is playing that kind of free-flowing, hit them on the break attacking football?
The one thing that I think we've seen from both of these clubs in Europe and throughout the season is that it's not terribly predictable, and there will be twists and turns. So I think there will be moments where I think Tottenham Hotspur, it might even be at the beginning of the game, in the first 20 minutes, where they go flying out at Manchester United and try and throw a couple of big punches early, get a goal, maybe two, and try and carry a lead through the rest of the game. But if they don't, and it's still 0-0, you can easily see Man United growing into the game. And we've seen in these big games in Europe, Bruno Fernandes really stepped up. Amad Diallo, who we saw today, I think one of the keys for them between now and that final is getting him up to complete speed so that he can start in that game. Dorgu, I think, was terrific. Casemiro even has been good in this Europa League run, along with Ugarte in that midfield. Lenny Yoro, I think, had one of his best games in the United shirt today as well. So you're starting to see some of these players deliver their best. So I think it is definitely going to be a game where I don't think one team is going to control it for the full 90 minutes. And no matter who has a lead, they will not feel comfortable with that lead, because we've seen United against Lyon in the quarterfinal completely throw away an advantageous situation. We've certainly seen Spurs do that any number of times, any number of ways. So I think it's going to be one of those where you won't really be able to predict how it's going to go as it goes along. Almost as we talked about this earlier with the Barcelona-Inter semifinal, where as you went along, you still couldn't figure it out. I think that's kind of where we're at with this final matchup.
I'm not going to dare you to make a prediction, so it's time for a short break here on Scoreline.